Okay, now we're going to talk about some just fundamental ideas or concepts in like steps that we follow to get change to happen. I don't know how else to say it. So one of the things that when I was working at Varian, I was actually a product manager of a tube that we were making for a specific supplier. And the supplier had some ideas. They're like, well, we want the tool to do this, 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 and this. And so we take those requirements to our engineers, and they start figuring out within those requirements what kind of X-ray tube we can make. So they go through a couple different designs, and then they take their best designs and send them over to the customer, and the customer's like, yeah, we like this, but we changed this and this and this. They go through that again, and when the customer is signing off on the design, then we move into this prototype phase, where they're actually working with buyers. They're sending out orders and bringing in material and actually building a working functional tube. Now we still have parameters, and we're going from a design or paper phase or CAD phase into this prototype phase, and things that we think might work the way they were designed to work might not work. So we take this prototype and we start testing it, and we're trying to test it to see if it will meet the design criteria. And once it does, then we can send it to our customer and say, here's a working prototype, right? And then they can test it in the environment that maybe they're not telling us all the environment, and if it's working well for them, then we can move on. If it's not, they'll come back and say, okay, these are the things that we need changed, and we might even fall back into the design iteration again to redesign it for the new requirements, or maybe we just have to tweak the prototype, right? And so we're keeping track of all of our changes and all of our test results. We go into retesting until we finally get it to where the customer is satisfied, and then we can go into production. Usually when we do this, we're using a team that's not just the engineers, the electrical and mechanical, and maybe the physicists, but we also have people from documentation to make sure that, and customer relationships and supply chain. So we have all of these support personnel and a project leader or program leader to make sure that things are running smooth. And we also have milestones, so we know what steps we need to take, and once we get through different milestones, we'll celebrate. Say, hey, we're now in the prototype phase, let's go out for lunch, type thing. So that's called the experimental approach. Sometimes we already know what it takes to get to where we want, right? We know, for instance, with movies, we know that we got to find a script, massage the script, get the actors, find a location, shoot, and then we spend a huge amount of time in the editing. So honestly, to get to shooting and get done with the shoot might take 3 months, and then the editing part might take a year or two. So one of the things that we look at is how do we compress that? So especially when we're in a huge change environment, like lots of changes happening really fast, and we're trying to catch up or stay ahead of the game, how do we compress our innovation or our creation process? The Twilight series, you may love them, may hate them, but they use a compression approach. They used overlapping steps. So there's 3, and I'm going to the last one first because why not? But so what they did is they had a director, set of actors. They found most of the locations they wanted to shoot. They had the script, so they shot the first movie. And then when that director with his or her editing crew went and started editing the movie, they brought a new director on to prep for the second movie. And they adjusted whatever locations they needed adjusted. They already had the actors and actresses ready. And then they could start shooting while the first movie was still being edited. One of the things that the creators of the Lord of the Rings did was instead of shooting, editing, giving us a movie, and going back and shooting, editing, giving us another movie, is they shot everything at one time and then broke it up into 3 movies. And they edit the first movie and start the release process, which takes some time too, and continue to edit while the first one's being released and promoted and all that stuff. And so the editing process of the last 2 were going on. And so both of these movie groups could compress the time it took to release their movies. Another thing we can do is outsource stuff, get our suppliers involved. Say we have a new X-ray and it needs a new disc it doesn't matter, I guess, if you know what the disc is, but the disc might have certain parameters, or maybe the bearings need to be a special bearing. Instead of taking our engineers and having them focus on improving the bearings, we might have suppliers that already have a lot of expertise in bearing engineering and improvement, and we'll ask them to get that part of the whole project done for us. And we'll have that agreement with them that they'll be the sole supplier, and they'll have a certain profit margin to make up for their engineering and stuff. The last thing we can do, and it sounds kind of duh, but we can say, hey, this step usually takes 3 months. What can we do to compress it to like 3 weeks? In the movie The Martian, that's how they did most of their how do we save our friend on Mars. And they would look at the steps and just how can we shorten them, or can we just get rid of steps altogether? And that's how they compress theirs. All right, now we're going to talk about the risk of not changing. When things are happening, sometimes we've been very successful, and we're relying on our past success to continue to give us the profit margin that we're comfortable with. But things are changing around us, and if we don't recognize the changes, we might lose that profit margin. So some of the things that happens are like this idea of the blind stage, where things are changing, they're having a direct effect on us, they're giving our competitors more competitive advantage, some of the market share is being lost, but we're blind to it. We're not, the key indicators that would help us understand that aren't coming in to wake us up, right? Then we might get to the point where, we're awake, but we're already behind the ball and we're scared. And we're like, well, maybe this will just go away and we don't have to do anything about it. Or maybe we have to do something about it, right? And sometimes, like my ethics teacher was saying, we have power wires that go through neighborhoods. And somebody came up with some research that said, hey, these wires are, there's increased leukemia associated with power wires. And the power companies looked at it and said, no, that's not statistically significant. That study's wrong. It really doesn't matter to us. But there's, now stories circulating about kids dying. And even though the power company wasn't responsible, and there wasn't anything that could prove that they were, they just said, it was impacting them, and they were in inaction, right? They're like, but it's not our fault. It's not our fault. It doesn't matter. Your PR is just screwed right now. You have to do something about it. And sometimes we'll get into we'll be inactive, and then we'll react poorly, and like the power company, they start blaming the people who created the stats, and they resisted the lawsuit of the kid who got leukemia and said it's not our fault. It's not our fault. At this point, it doesn't matter if it's your fault. You have a PR nightmare that you have to manage, and then they get into a crisis stage where we're having now they're trying to pass laws to say, we got to take all those power wires and bury them, which would cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. But because we were blind, inactive, and reacted wrong, now we're in crisis stage. And eventually this, at any time we can change and correct our action before this dissolution stage. And dissolution means we're done. Now we're filing bankruptcy and closing doors. So these are some of the steps and things that happen when we're not willing to change. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to end this right now, and then we'll start part 4 in just a minute.